attorney has called this a manifest injustice and says that, of course, there will be an appeal to this. And here's a post that just came through from Don Jr., involved in this as well and reacting to it. He says, "We have reached the point where our political beliefs, combined with what venue your case is heard, are the primary determinants of the outcome, not the facts of the case. It's truly sad what has happened to our country, and I hope others see it before it's too late to correct course." So with that, we bring back in constitutional law attorney Jonathan Turley, GWU law professor and a Fox News contributor, and Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor. Jonathan, the impact on the other people involved here. Alan Weisselberg, as I said, longtime business associate of the former President Trump, already was convicted in a separate case against the Trump organization, and the impact on the two younger members of the Trump family by not being allowed to incorporate or serve as officers of New York corporations for 2 years.
Well, they can certainly get around this. There's other jurisdictions that they can incorporate in, places like Delaware, and they can easily shift their business. The question is going to be, as Ari noted earlier, how many businesses are likely to shift on their own? New York is already viewed as fairly hostile for businesses that are moving out. There's an exodus from the state. This can't be good in trying to stem that flow. And the issue, again, is not that the Trump organization did not inflate or undervalue properties. This is a raw partisan exercise by James. She made it that way in the election. I have no doubt in my mind that no other company in New York would have been subject to this type of draconian exercise and would have been subject to this type of ruling. And that should give people pause in New York, particularly in the bars. Is this what we've become? And it's going to have an impact on other businesses because they have to be able to trust that there is a neutrality in their laws, that they're not just going to become pawns in political games by figures like James.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Americans expect. They expect to be treated equally. They expect that the law applies to everyone equally. And we hear that a lot thrown around these days. But it seems, unfortunately, as Don Jr. points out in his post, that it doesn't feel that way a lot of the time anymore. And I think that's one of the things that is propelling the campaign of former President Donald Trump. Again, this time around, and I just want to play this. This is from Judge Engoron. This is the judge who made this decision, over $350 million against the Trump organization today. Here he is back in March of 2015, giving a speech at CUNY Local College here, Queensborough, and he talks about the fact that sometimes you don't really need a jury. Sometimes it's better, as you can hear his own words here, but he's essentially saying not to have one, and that sometimes it's hard to factor out your own emotions. Listen closely to what Judge Engoron says here.
I'm going to say something controversial, even though I'm being taped. Juries get it wrong a lot. I have a tool that I can deal with that. It's called jury notwithstanding the verdict, judgment notwithstanding the verdict. I'm an impartial referee, but it's hard to factor out my own emotions.
Yeah, I like it when I get to decide on my own, and sometimes it's hard to factor out my emotions. Kerri Urbahn is joining us now. Kerri, I hope you heard that soundbite because I know you were just miking up, but your reaction to that in light of what we see in this decision today?
I mean, it's laughable. I was in the courtroom when Donald Trump was being questioned, and no matter what he said, even when, yes, there were times when it was appropriate for the judge to shut him down when he was, say, going on rants or something like that, there were times when Donald Trump was very sharply and acutely explaining his businesses and his assets, and even then, the judge would try to stop him from giving context, and it was relevant context. I remember sitting there thinking, this is not a fair process. And this decision today reflects exactly what I saw in the courtroom. The Democrats are determined to crush Donald Trump financially and politically. and change the 2024 election. And that's what this is about. And we all know that based on what the AG campaigned on. So that's not a secret. But yet, as you all were just discussing, is this how we do democracy in America? Is this how justice should be?
No. I'll answer that. Across the board, on all sides. And you look at what happened yesterday in the Georgia courtroom. And Fani Willis basically, was able to sort of rant at length, right? And she really didn't get shut down by the judge in there. Let me bring Ari back in on that. Because when you look at the reporting this morning, I was watching a number of different networks and reading things out there, Ari, and it was like, wow, she's our hero. Isn't she incredible? And then on the other foot, when the former president opened his mouth in court, and he can rant, we all know that, but to talk about how he saw this valuation issue, he was shut down.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating week to watch justice unfold. You can watch it in Georgia, you can watch it in Manhattan, and now you can watch it in one other item that we haven't talked about. This was also a week in which the special counsel investigating Hunter Biden announced an indictment of a source the FBI had, who they say lied to the FBI to make up bad stuff about Hunter. Fine. If a source lied to the FBI like that, I have no problem with prosecuting that person. But then why hasn't Michael Steele, the author of the Steele dossier, been prosecuted? This, again, is the two sides of justice. And it keeps seeming that if you're out to get Donald Trump, you get the green carpet. You can do whatever you want. Just walk right down and attack Donald Trump. But on the other side, these prosecutors, especially in blue areas of America, are waiting to pounce, and the press pounces along with them and paints a very sympathetic portrait. So why was that source indicted and Michael Steele is celebrated by the left? That's the problem I have with justice in America since Donald Trump came to office and the Democrats have broken the norms.
Jonathan Turley, it may come down to a decision, at the largest level at the Supreme Court about whether or not the former president has immunity in some of the federal cases that he faces regarding the election and January 6th. How anxious do you think they are to take that on? And to perhaps bring some form, will they perhaps bring some form of equilibrium to these processes?
Well, I think that the former president is going to have difficult sledding on the immunity claim, even in front of the Supreme Court. The sweeping claims made are not going to sit well with some of the justices. But I think that what the public is beginning to see is the fulfillment of Trump's narrative. I mean, these Democrats have done that. It's like the old joke that I'm not paranoid if people are actually out to get me. For a lot of folks are saying, well, maybe he was right that and these split screens of multiple jurisdictions is driving home that message.
It's amazing. What fascinating times we live in, right? Jonathan, thank you. Kerri, thank you. Ari, always great to see you.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.